The beginning of the end. Charlotte Lennox was the darling of her family, a figure admired not just for her beauty, but also for her charisma and warmth. Raised by her mother, an accomplished artist, and her father, a respected historian, Charlotte had grown up surrounded by love, creativity, and an intense sense of responsibility. She'd inherited her mother's grace and her father's analytical mind, but also a longing for connection that often left her vulnerable in relationships. She dreamed of a deep, abiding love, one that would break the generational cycles of quiet, unseen pain beneath her family's dignified surface. It was during her years at university, in a seminar on medieval architecture, that she first encountered Nathaniel Nate Carver. Nate was everything she had been warned about, but never encountered firsthand. Brilliant yet roguish, charming yet detached, and intensely self-assured. A year older and studying engineering, Nate had an effortless charisma that drew people in. To Charlotte, he represented freedom and exhilaration, a break from the carefully measured world of her childhood. He embodied the spontaneity she craved but couldn't always muster on her own. Their connection was instantaneous. Conversations that started with books and architecture morphed into long nights discussing dreams and life philosophies. Before long, they were inseparable, their lives entwining as naturally as vines on a trellis. Charlotte adored Nate's fiery, passionate spirit, and he, in turn, seemed enchanted by her intellect and quiet strength. In her presence, Nate displayed a rare vulnerability, a rawness that she mistook for authenticity. But beneath his enigmatic smile and charming wit lay shadows, things Charlotte didn't yet see. Their engagement was like a fairy tale. Nate proposed on a balmy spring evening, on a secluded stretch of the coastline near Charlotte's family's beach house. He planned every detail, from the candles lining the path to the custom ring he'd chosen, a vintage piece that spoke to Charlotte's love for the past. The proposal left her breathless, her heart full. Charlotte believed, wholeheartedly, that she'd found the love she had always dreamt of. Her parents, while thrilled, observed the couple cautiously. They saw, perhaps more clearly than she, the complexity that simmered under Nate's easy charm. Still, for Charlotte's sake, they set aside their reservations. Planning the wedding was a whirlwind of excitement and stress. Charlotte, deeply committed to creating an event that reflected her and Nate's shared interests, was drawn to intimate details, handwritten invitations, antique lace, and soft, candlelit settings. She wanted a day that captured their journey together, a day that celebrated not just their love, but their unique journey to this moment. Nate, on the other hand, seemed increasingly uninterested in the finer points of planning. He offered his input reluctantly, often distractedly. When pressed, he'd shrug it off, saying he wanted her to have her dream wedding. As the months slipped by, Charlotte began to notice small but unsettling shifts in Nate's behavior. His once devoted attention seemed divided, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. At first, she chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, rationalizing his absences as stress over work or family obligations. After all, wedding planning could be exhausting, and Nate's family was known for their high expectations. But the nagging feeling lingered, shadowing her otherwise blissful anticipation with unease. Then, during one of Nate's unexplained work trips, Charlotte's best friend, Eleanor, spotted him in a neighboring town, arm in arm with a woman Charlotte had never met. Eleanor wrestled with how to tell her friend, but ultimately chose to let Charlotte know, suspecting it was better for her to find out sooner rather than later. When Eleanor brought it up, Charlotte laughed it off, dismissing it as a misunderstanding. Nate was loyal, she assured herself. She wouldn't let paranoia sabotage what they had. But as the wedding date grew closer, more signs began to emerge. Nate's phone, once left casually on the coffee table, was now password protected, and he became defensive when asked about his whereabouts. Charlotte tried to brush it off, convincing herself that she was being irrational, caught up in the anxieties of impending marriage. One evening, as they worked through seating arrangements, Charlotte noticed a change in Nate's demeanor when she mentioned her cousin Henry. a photographer and one of her closest confidants, Henry had been traveling abroad for a series of shoots and had yet to meet Nate. Upon his return, Henry would join them for a weekend at her family's country house. Charlotte hoped Henry's presence would ease the tension that had been creeping into her and Nate's relationship. But at the mention of Henry's name, Nate's face stiffened, his smile strained. She dismissed it, as she had so many other things, assuming he was simply weary. The weekend with Henry, however, would prove more illuminating than Charlotte could ever have anticipated. Henry was observant, and his love for his cousin went beyond mere familial duty. From the moment he met Nate, he sensed something amiss. Nate's casual charm struck Henry as practiced, calculated. He watched closely, noting the subtle shifts in Nate's manner, the way he avoided certain questions, his impatience with the quiet moments that Henry treasured. That Sunday evening, as Charlotte and Henry walked through the nearby fields under a sky peppered with stars, Henry voiced his concerns. He shared his observations, urging Charlotte to consider the possibility that Nate might not be as he seemed. Charlotte was defensive at first, unwilling to believe that her friend and confidant could harbor such doubts. But as Henry gently laid out his observations, Charlotte's heart began to sink. Determined to confront her fears, Charlotte decided to test Nate to see if he could offer her the reassurance she desperately needed. The following evening, she proposed they spend a quiet evening together without distractions. But Nate made excuses, claiming a last-minute work obligation. When he left, Charlotte's heart thudded with a mix of dread and determination. She followed him. Under the cover of twilight, Charlotte watched as Nate pulled into the driveway of a small, unassuming house on the other side of town. Her breath caught as she saw him greet the woman Eleanor had described, tall, with auburn hair, leaning into him with an ease that spoke of familiarity. They lingered on the doorstep, exchanging words Charlotte couldn't hear, before disappearing inside. Frozen with shock and betrayal, Charlotte's heart shattered. But as tears stung her eyes, anger began to replace her sadness. She refused to be a passive victim in her own story. Unraveling the web, Charlotte returned home, her mind swirling with disbelief, hurt, and anger. The man she had trusted with her heart, her dreams, and her future had betrayed her in the most calculated way. She spent a sleepless night pacing her living room, replaying every memory, every conversation, searching for clues she might have missed. Each realization cut deeper than the last. How could she have been so blind? How could he, who had professed such love, hold so many secrets? By dawn, her anger had turned into resolve. Charlotte wasn't just heartbroken. She was furious, determined to unmask Nate's lies. She wouldn't allow him to manipulate her into a life built on deception. She was stronger than that, smarter than he thought. With a plan beginning to take shape in her mind, she called Eleanor, her best friend and trusted ally. Eleanor arrived without hesitation, concern etched into her face as she listened to Charlotte recount the events of the previous night. When Charlotte was done, Eleanor took her hands, squeezing them tightly. "You're going to get through this," she promised, "but you have to play this carefully." Together, they devised a plan to uncover the full extent of Nate's infidelity and deceit. They needed evidence, something that would leave no room for Nate to deny the truth. Charlotte didn't want to act impulsively. She wanted to be strategic. If Nate had so carefully hidden this secret, she was certain he would do anything to protect it. And she wanted to ensure he could never lie his way out of the confrontation she was preparing for. Over the next few days, Charlotte played her role well, maintaining a calm facade whenever she was with Nate. They continued their wedding planning as if nothing had changed, but every moment with him felt surreal, like she was observing a stranger. She began noticing details that had once seemed insignificant: the way he kept his phone close, the coded texts that seemed to buzz in at odd hours, the slip of a woman's name here and there, always casually covered up or brushed aside. Each clue added fuel to the fire of her growing distrust. Determined to leave nothing to chance, Charlotte enlisted Henry, who was equally invested in protecting his cousin from further harm. An experienced photographer, Henry was adept at noticing the things most people missed and gathering information with subtlety. He arranged to shadow Nate for a few days, watching from a distance, noting his movements and interactions, and documenting everything he found. It didn't take long for Henry to confirm what Charlotte feared. Nate wasn't merely seeing another woman. He was leading a double life. On paper, Nate was an upstanding fiancé, a professional with a spotless reputation and an admirable dedication to his work. But behind closed doors, he maintained an elaborate network of connections, parties, and most damningly, several other women he was seeing in secret. The truth was far worse than Charlotte could have imagined. Nate's infidelity was no mere affair. It was a lifestyle. As the evidence piled up, Charlotte's heartbreak was replaced by an overwhelming sense of betrayal and outrage. She felt trapped in a nightmare, one where the love of her life had carefully constructed an illusion just for her. But rather than retreat, she grew resolute. She would confront Nate, not just for herself, but for the life she had envisioned, the love she had invested, and the future she deserved. It was her right to seek the truth, and she wouldn't back down. 2 weeks before the wedding, Charlotte made her move. She arranged for a dinner at a quiet restaurant Nate had taken her to on one of their first dates. She chose this spot deliberately, a place layered with memories and sentiments that once held meaning for them both. She wanted to confront him in a setting where he couldn't easily walk away, where the atmosphere of their past might force him to recognize the weight of his actions. As Nate arrived, Charlotte could see the look of surprise on his face. She was dressed in a way she hadn't in months, with an elegance and determination that seemed to startle him. The light in her eyes was not one of love, but of icy resolve. He tried to pull her in for a kiss, but she stepped back, gesturing toward the table. "Sit," she said quietly, her voice steady but firm. Nate complied, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The meal began in silence. Charlotte could feel Nate's discomfort, the way he shifted in his seat, sensing that something was wrong, but not quite daring to ask. Finally, Charlotte looked him in the eyes and spoke, her tone laced with restrained anger. "Nate, do you love me?" He blinked, taken aback by the question. "Of course I do, Charlotte. You know that." "Do I?" she replied, her voice calm but intense. "Because I've spent the last few weeks questioning everything, wondering if I ever really knew you at all." Nate's expression tightened. "What are you talking about?" Charlotte leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. "I'm talking about the lies, Nate. The secrets, the late nights, the woman I saw you with. And don't even think about denying it. Because I have proof." The color drained from Nate's face. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in a trap, scrambling for an escape. He opened his mouth to speak, but Charlotte cut him off. "Don't lie to me again," she said, her voice low and fierce. "You owe me the truth. After everything, you owe me that much." He looked down, the weight of her words pressing upon him. After a long silence, Nate finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for you to find out. I thought I could keep my life separate." Charlotte's heart hardened as she heard the admission. She could barely recognize the man before her, a man she once thought she loved. "Separate," she repeated, incredulous. "You thought you could keep a whole other life, other women, separate from me." Nate's silence was an answer in itself. Charlotte felt a bitter satisfaction as she looked at him, the mask of love and loyalty he'd worn finally crumbling. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking slightly despite her best efforts to remain strong. "I thought you were the one person who understood me, who cared about me for who I am." He raised his hands, attempting to pacify her. "Charlotte, please, let's just talk about this. I'll make it right. But she shook her head, stopping him cold. "You don't get to make this right, Nate. You destroyed it. Whatever we had, you broke it beyond repair." The weight of her words hung between them, a finality that Nate seemed to sense. He sat back, defeated, his head bowed in shame. Charlotte took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm calling off the wedding," she said, the decision as final as the sound of a door slamming shut. "You can tell everyone whatever you want. I'm done with you, with this." Nate looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Charlotte, please." No," she interrupted firmly. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." With that, she stood, the resolve in her step a sharp contrast to the anguish she felt. As she left the restaurant, Charlotte felt a mixture of liberation and sorrow. She knew the pain would linger, that healing would be a journey, but she also knew she had reclaimed her dignity, her life, and her future. Back in the solitude of her apartment, Charlotte allowed herself to feel the full weight of her decision. She knew her life would be different, that she'd be facing a path filled with questions and uncertainties, but she also knew she could look herself in the mirror without shame, knowing she had faced the truth, no matter how painful. And as she gazed out into the night, she felt a spark of hope rekindling within her, a reminder that her story was far from over. The path forward. The days following Charlotte's decision were a whirlwind of mixed emotions and difficult choices. She had called off the wedding, severing her ties with Nate and the life she had envisioned with him. She informed her family and close friends, crafting a brief but resolute message that offered no room for questions or pity. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, yet Charlotte felt a hollow ache deep inside. She was relieved to be free of Nate's deceit, but the loss of the life she had planned left her feeling vulnerable and adrift. Eleanor, her ever-loyal friend, was a constant source of strength, checking in daily and encouraging Charlotte to prioritize her own healing. "You need to reconnect with yourself," she said over coffee one morning. "You've been through hell, and you deserve time to rebuild." Charlotte took her words to heart. She decided to step away from her life in the city temporarily. She packed a few essentials, left her job on hold, and retreated to her family's lake house, a secluded property nestled in a forest clearing that had been her haven since childhood. It was a place steeped in memories of simpler, happier times, a place where she could clear her mind and rediscover the parts of herself she felt she'd lost along the way. The lake house was serene, with tall, whispering pines and a wide, reflective lake that shimmered in the early autumn light. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. As she settled in, Charlotte felt the first stirrings of peace, a sensation she hadn't experienced in weeks. Here, she could strip away the layers of betrayal and heartache, focusing only on herself and what truly mattered. Each day at the lake house became a small victory in reclaiming her identity. Charlotte began her mornings with brisk walks around the lake, breathing in the cool, dewy air. She'd sit by the shore, watching the sunrise, feeling a profound connection to the natural beauty surrounding her. In these moments, she realized just how much of herself she had sacrificed to keep her relationship with Nate afloat, bending to fit the mold of his expectations, ignoring her own needs and desires. On one of her morning walks, she ventured further into the woods, stumbling upon an old, weathered bench she hadn't seen since childhood. She sat down, her mind drifting to memories of her parents bringing her here, teaching her to appreciate life's small joys. The rustling of leaves, the call of distant birds, the way sunlight filtered through the trees. Her parents had always championed a life of substance, of genuine connection, a life rooted in values Nate could never understand. As the days passed, Charlotte began a journal, pouring her thoughts, frustrations, and hopes onto the pages. She wrote candidly, without fear of judgment, as if she were confiding in a trusted friend. Her entries revealed a deeper layer of her feelings toward Nate, not just the hurt and betrayal, but the way she had let herself be diminished, suppressing her voice and compromising her values for the illusion of love. The process was painful but cathartic, each entry bringing her closer to clarity. Yet, despite her growing resolve, Charlotte couldn't shake a nagging question that haunted her every thought. What had made her fall for Nate in the first place? Why had she ignored the warning signs, the gut feelings that had urged her to look closer, to question him sooner? The introspection was difficult, dredging up memories and insecurities she had buried long ago. In Nate, she realized she had seen a mirror of her own self-doubt, her fears of inadequacy. She had been drawn to his allure, not out of love, but as a way to fill a void she hadn't even known existed. In a bid to fill her days with meaningful activity, Charlotte took up painting, a skill she hadn't touched since her teenage years. Her mother had been a painter, and though Charlotte hadn't inherited her talent, she found solace in the brushstrokes, in creating something from the emotion she carried. She painted the lake, the trees, the skies at dusk. Each stroke felt like a step forward, a reminder that she could build something beautiful from the shattered pieces of her past. One evening, as she watched the sunset, Charlotte felt the urge to paint something different. She painted herself, her reflection in the lake, her face half shrouded in shadows. The image, raw and vulnerable, brought her to tears. She saw the pain, the resilience, the strength she had found within herself. This was a version of herself she could be proud of, a woman who had faced betrayal and come through with a renewed sense of purpose. Her solitude was occasionally interrupted by visits from friends and family, all eager to offer support but careful to respect her space. Henry came one weekend, bringing with him his camera and a renewed sense of curiosity. He captured candid photos of her, laughing by the lakeside, painting on the porch, and gazing at the stars. His presence was grounding, a reminder of the people who loved her unconditionally. It was during one of these weekends that Henry shared his own reflections on Nate's betrayal. "You know," he said quietly as they sat by the fire, "I always felt there was something calculated about him. But I never wanted to doubt your happiness." Charlotte nodded, her gaze distant. "I ignored so many signs, Henry. It's like I was wearing blinders, desperate to believe in him." Henry looked at her, his expression gentle but firm. "It wasn't weakness, Charlotte. You saw what you wanted to see because you believed in love. There's no shame in that." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. She realized that her choice to love Nate wasn't a failing. It was part of her journey, a step toward understanding her own worth. With this insight, Charlotte felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a clarity that illuminated her path forward. A week before she planned to return to the city, Charlotte took one last walk through the woods, reflecting on the journey she'd taken since she first arrived. She felt stronger, more grounded, and most importantly, ready to face whatever lay ahead. She had confronted her own vulnerabilities, acknowledging her role in the choices she'd made, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her sense of self. As she left the lake house, Charlotte knew that her story was far from over. The chapter with Nate had ended, but she had a life waiting for her, one she could live on her terms, with authenticity and conviction. Her first act upon returning to the city was a symbolic one. She gathered every memento from her relationship with Nate, photos, gifts, keepsakes, and put them in a box. Instead of throwing them away, she drove to a quiet spot by the river and set the box in the water, watching as it floated away, carried by the current. She felt a profound sense of release, a final goodbye to the dreams she had once cherished, replaced now by the promise of new beginnings. Back in her apartment, Charlotte looked around, realizing that everything felt different. The space that had once echoed with memories of Nate now felt like her own again, a blank slate for the life she would build anew. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. As the weeks turned into months, Charlotte immersed herself in her work and passions, reconnecting with friends, exploring new interests, and embracing the freedom she had reclaimed. She wasn't in a rush to find love again, content instead with discovering more about herself, growing from the pain she had endured. Her heart, though scared, was healing, each day a step toward a brighter future. One evening, as she sat in her favorite cafe, she caught the eye of a man sitting across from her, a man with a kind, open expression that reminded her of the peace she had found at the lake house. He smiled, and she returned the gesture, feeling a warmth that had been absent for so long. And in that moment, Charlotte knew she was ready, not for another relationship, but for the possibility of one. She had faced her past, her mistakes, her vulnerabilities, and emerged stronger. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to embrace it with a heart open to love, not born out of need, but out of the strength and wholeness she had found within herself. Reclaiming control. Returning to the rhythm of her life in the city brought Charlotte a new sense of purpose. Her decision to focus on herself, her work, and her passions fueled her daily routine. But as she stepped back into her career, she felt the need to rebuild her reputation, not just to prove herself to others, but as a testament to her own growth and resilience. Charlotte worked in marketing for a boutique firm known for taking on unique, challenging projects. She had always been a creative at heart, but for too long, her ambitions had been clouded by her personal life, by compromises she'd made to fit Nate's expectations. Now, her perspective was clear. She poured her energy into her work, finding fulfillment in crafting campaigns that brought new brands to life, telling authentic stories that resonated with audiences. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Her boss, impressed by her renewed dedication, entrusted her with a high-profile client, a sustainable fashion brand launching a new line. The opportunity was exactly what she needed. This project became her escape, a way to channel her emotions into something productive. She spent long nights brainstorming, collaborating with designers, and crafting a story that reflected her own journey, one of resilience, reinvention, and the courage to start anew. The brand's message resonated with her deeply, and she used every bit of her creativity and intuition to make the campaign a success. Yet, despite her professional progress, reminders of Nate's betrayal continued to shadow her. Mutual friends hesitated around her, unsure how to bring up his name or whether to include her in events where he might appear. Charlotte noticed the subtle changes, the way people danced around the topic, as if trying to shield her from further pain. She appreciated their intentions, but grew frustrated by the unspoken discomfort. She didn't want to be defined by her past with Nate. She wanted her friends to see her as a woman who had moved beyond that chapter. One evening, Charlotte made a decision. She would reclaim control not just over her work and her emotions, but over her entire social life. She wanted to be seen as someone who had risen above, who wasn't held captive by past wounds. She invited her close friends to dinner, hoping to address the elephant in the room once and for all. Over a meal filled with laughter and good food, she shared her thoughts with them, her voice steady and clear. "I know everyone feels uncomfortable bringing up Nate, and I get it. It's an awkward situation," she began, glancing around the table, meeting each friend's gaze. "But I don't want us to tiptoe around this anymore. I'm okay. More than that, I'm better than okay. I want to move forward, and I want all of you to move forward with me." Her words resonated, and her friends visibly relaxed, grateful for her openness. They shared stories of their own experiences with heartbreak and resilience, creating a bond that transcended the past. Charlotte left that evening feeling lighter, her friendship strengthened, and her support system reaffirmed. But her journey to reclaim control didn't end there. She realized there was one more step she needed to take, confronting Nate directly. He had left her with unanswered questions and unresolved anger, emotions she didn't want lingering in her heart any longer. She wasn't seeking closure for him, but for herself, to finally put this chapter behind her without any lingering regrets. After weeks of deliberation, she reached out to him, arranging to meet at a cafe where they had often gone in the early days of their relationship. The familiarity of the setting felt fitting, a symbolic return to a place where things had once been simple. She wanted to face him in an environment where the past might remind them both of the pain they'd caused, but also the growth they'd each undergone. Nate arrived on time, looking visibly nervous. The sight of him stirred memories in Charlotte's mind, but they felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. She could see the weight of his guilt in the way he looked at her, his eyes carrying a sadness she hadn't seen before. He sat across from her, the silence stretching uncomfortably as he searched for words. "Charlotte," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I don't even know where to start." She nodded, maintaining her composure. "Then don't start. Just be honest." He swallowed, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I was selfish," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I wanted it all, you know. The security with you, the excitement with others. I thought I could manage both, but I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I can't even fully understand." Charlotte felt a pang of anger, but kept her tone steady. "You did hurt me, Nate, more than you can imagine. But I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here because I need to move on, and I can't do that with all this unresolved anger." Nate nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am sorry, Charlotte. I was too afraid to face my own shortcomings, so I ran, and I hid behind lies." She took a deep breath, her resolve unwavering. "I appreciate your apology, Nate, but forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me. I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because I refuse to carry this burden any longer." A look of relief washed over his face, and Charlotte knew he understood. This was her final act of letting go, of reclaiming the pieces of herself she had lost in their relationship. They parted ways amicably, each taking a different path out of the cafe, moving in opposite directions. And with each step, Charlotte felt lighter, as though she were walking toward a new horizon. The months that followed were transformative. Charlotte's campaign for the sustainable fashion brand became a resounding success, gaining national attention and even earning her firm an award for creative excellence. For the first time, she felt truly recognized for her work, her talents, and her passion, a validation she had once sought from others, but now found within herself. Her life began to blossom in unexpected ways. Her nights were filled with laughter, art galleries, and weekends spent with friends exploring the city's hidden treasures. She tried new things: painting classes, cooking exotic recipes, hiking trails she'd never ventured onto before. Each experience was a reminder of her resilience, her capacity to grow and thrive, even in the wake of heartbreak. And then, on a cool autumn afternoon, as she wandered through a local bookstore, she met someone unexpected. His name was Daniel, a writer with a quiet, kind demeanor and a penchant for travel. They struck up a conversation about a book they both reached for simultaneously, a classic on self-discovery and adventure. There was an ease to his company that felt refreshing, a stark contrast to the turbulence she had once known. As their friendship grew, Charlotte felt no rush, no desperation to define what they had. She was content to let it unfold naturally, to see where life would lead them. Daniel shared stories of his travels, his passion for documenting cultures and landscapes, and his dedication to living authentically, a value Charlotte had come to cherish deeply. With him, she felt no need to prove herself or alter her essence. He valued her for who she was, not for any idealized version. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sunset, Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, Charlotte, I admire your strength. It takes a lot to rise from betrayal and still be open to life." She looked at him, her heart full. "I don't know if it's strength," she replied softly. "Maybe it's just learning to let go, to forgive myself for the mistakes I made along the way." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that reassured her. "Whatever it is, it's inspiring." In that moment, Charlotte realized she was not the same woman who had fallen for Nate. She was stronger, wiser, and deeply in tune with her own worth. She had reclaimed her life, her friendships, her passions, and her dreams. And for the first time, she felt whole, not because someone else filled a void, but because she had learned to love herself entirely. As she looked out over the water, Charlotte felt a quiet peace settle within her. She had faced her past, confronted her pain, and emerged stronger than ever. Her journey was still unfolding, but she knew she was ready for whatever lay ahead. Life was no longer defined by betrayal, but by the resilience she had found, by the beauty she had reclaimed. And for Charlotte, that was everything. Building a new life, Charlotte's life took on a natural, fulfilling rhythm. After her encounter with Daniel, she felt inspired to further embrace this new chapter, this time without fear or hesitation. She allowed herself to savor each moment, each discovery, recognizing how much she had grown. Her nights weren't weighed down by regret or loneliness. Instead, they were filled with quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that was entirely her own. Work continued to blossom, especially after the success of her campaign. Charlotte's career had taken on a life of its own. Her boss offered her a promotion, an opportunity to lead her own team and develop high-profile projects. This was a milestone she hadn't anticipated, but it was an achievement she accepted with pride. She moved into a new, sunlit apartment that felt like a fresh start, a space she could fill with the colors and textures that mirrored her inner peace and creativity. Her mornings began with routine but intentional practices. She'd meditate by the window, letting the early sunlight bathe her in warmth, grounding herself in gratitude and openness. She made time for exercise, discovering a newfound love for yoga and running, each practice a way to center herself and release any lingering doubts or stress. She took joy in cooking meals for herself, filling her kitchen with the smell of fresh herbs and spices, appreciating the time she had to nourish her body and mind. Daniel remained a steady presence in her life. They would meet weekly, sometimes for coffee, other times for hikes or quiet evenings at the bookstore where they'd met. Their relationship grew slowly, a refreshing change from the intense and whirlwind romance she had once experienced with Nate. With Daniel, there was no need for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Instead, they found comfort in silence, in shared laughter, in conversations that ranged from the profound to the mundane. Their friendship was built on trust, respect, and a shared love for simplicity. During one of their hikes, Daniel confided in Charlotte about his own past heartbreak, a relationship that had ended painfully after he discovered his partner had been unfaithful. He spoke of the scars it left, how it had taken him years to trust again, and how he, too, had learned to embrace solitude as a source of healing. "I guess we're both survivors," in a way, he said, giving her a gentle smile. "Learning to trust ourselves and others again. It's not easy, but I think it makes us stronger." Charlotte nodded, touched by his openness. "I used to think I needed someone else to make me whole," she admitted, the words coming easily in his presence. "But I've learned that everything I need is already within me. Love is beautiful, but it shouldn't be a way to fill a void." They sat in quiet understanding, looking out at the mountains as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Charlotte realized in that moment that what she felt for Daniel was something rare and precious, a friendship with the potential for deeper connection, yet one that didn't demand immediate answers or promises. It was a relationship she could grow into naturally, a space where she could be her truest self. Around this time, Charlotte began receiving invitations to industry events, her work gaining recognition beyond her firm. At one of these events, she was introduced to a prominent editor at a leading lifestyle magazine who expressed interest in profiling her story. The journey of a woman who had overcome heartbreak to find success and self-worth. The idea intrigued Charlotte, and after some thought, she agreed, realizing that her story could inspire others who had faced similar struggles. The interview was conducted in her new apartment, the sunlight casting warm shadows across her walls as she spoke candidly about her journey. She shared her experiences with Nate, the pain of betrayal, and the healing process that had brought her to where she was now. She spoke of the lake house, the quiet mornings by the shore, the solace of painting, and the friendships that had lifted her through the darkest moments. It was a vulnerable conversation, but Charlotte felt empowered, knowing her words might reach others who needed them. When the article was published, it struck a chord. Messages began pouring in from readers who resonated with her story, people who had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and self-doubt. Some thanked her for sharing her journey. Others shared their own, finding comfort in the knowledge that they weren't alone. Charlotte felt a deep sense of purpose, realizing that her pain had become a source of strength, not only for herself, but for others as well. One evening, as she was scrolling through the messages, she received an unexpected email from an old college professor who had read the article. He was impressed by her story and extended an invitation for her to speak at a university seminar on resilience and personal growth. Charlotte was taken aback. Public speaking was something she had always avoided, the thought of addressing a room full of people making her nervous. But as she pondered the invitation, she recognized an opportunity not only to inspire others, but to push herself beyond her comfort zone. The day of the seminar arrived, and Charlotte found herself facing a packed auditorium of students and faculty. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the journey that had brought her here, of the resilience she had discovered within. She began her speech with the words she had written in her journal months ago. Healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning to carry it without letting it define you. She spoke honestly about her experiences, the mistakes she had made, and the lessons she had learned. She shared the importance of self-love, of finding joy in solitude, and of the strength that comes from embracing vulnerability. The room was silent, each person captivated by her words. She saw faces light up, nods of understanding, and felt a profound connection with her audience. After the seminar, several students approached her, sharing their own struggles and expressing gratitude for her openness. Charlotte listened, offering encouragement and support, each conversation reminding her of the power of shared experiences. Returning home that evening, Charlotte felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known before. She realized that her story, her journey, was no longer about overcoming heartbreak, but about discovering purpose, resilience, and the capacity to inspire others. She had transformed her pain into something meaningful, something that could empower others to find strength in their own lives. As winter settled in, Charlotte found herself spending more time with Daniel, their relationship gradually deepening. He was patient, understanding her need for time and space, never pressuring her to define their relationship. She valued his companionship, the way he supported her dreams, and the ease with which they shared both the ordinary and extraordinary moments. One evening, as snowflakes began to fall softly outside, Daniel invited her to his family's cabin for a weekend getaway. Charlotte hesitated at first, the idea of meeting his family feeling like a significant step. But she trusted Daniel, and the prospect of spending a quiet weekend in the snow-covered woods felt like a fitting end to the transformative year she'd had. The cabin was nestled in a remote valley, surrounded by tall, snow-dusted pines and a frozen lake that shimmered under the moonlight. Daniel's family welcomed her warmly, their kindness and humor putting her at ease. She spent the weekend immersed in stories, laughter, and cozy fireside conversations, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. One night, as they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, Daniel reached for her hand. "Charlotte, I want you to know something," he began, his voice soft but steady. "You don't have to answer now, and I don't want you to feel pressured. But I see a future with you, one that's built on trust, respect, and all the things we've shared. I'm not asking for promises. I just want you to know how much you mean to me." Charlotte's heart swelled, and for the first time, she felt truly ready to open herself to love again. She looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. "Daniel, I feel the same. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that whatever comes, I want you in it." Their embrace that night felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for, a quiet acknowledgement of the healing she had undergone. She had transformed her pain, her doubts, and her insecurities into strength, into a love that was genuine and unforced. As the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, Charlotte sat by the window, watching the world wake up, the snow glistening under the pale morning sun. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In that quiet moment, she whispered to herself, a promise of gratitude and hope. Here's to new beginnings. And as she watched the sun rise, she knew that she was ready for whatever life had in store, her heart open, her spirit resilient, her journey just beginning anew. A life reimagined. The new year ushered in a sense of renewal for Charlotte. Each day felt like an opportunity, a step further away from the painful past and toward a future she was creating with care, intention, and love. The cabin trip with Daniel and his family had left her heart full, and while they hadn't officially defined their relationship, they shared a silent understanding, a promise of commitment that required no words, only presence. Charlotte cherished the space to let their connection evolve naturally, allowing her heart to fully embrace the love she had once been afraid to give and receive. As winter melted into spring, Charlotte's life continued to bloom in ways she had never anticipated. The magazine article about her journey had sparked a wave of interest from people who wanted to collaborate with her. She began receiving invitations to speak at various events and conferences, each one an opportunity to connect with others who found inspiration in her story. Her work and personal life felt beautifully intertwined, both guided by her passion for helping others and her love for authenticity. One afternoon, her former professor, Dr. Jensen, called to propose an idea. "Charlotte," he began, his tone warm with excitement, "I've been working with a few colleagues on a book project about resilience, a collection of personal stories and reflections. I thought of you immediately. Would you be interested in contributing your story?" The idea was both exhilarating and daunting. Charlotte had always written privately, her journal a safe place for her innermost thoughts, but the notion of putting her experiences into a book, something permanent and widely accessible, filled her with both fear and excitement. After careful consideration, she agreed, seeing it as a final step in her healing, a way to put her past to rest while inspiring others to embrace their own journey. The writing process became a deeply introspective experience, one that brought her back to the lake house in her mind, to the quiet mornings of reflection and self-discovery. She spent weekends tucked away in her apartment, sipping tea as she wrote, each word pouring from a place of honesty and vulnerability. She wrote about Nate, not in anger or resentment, but from a place of acceptance. She acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, but also the ways in which that experience had forced her to grow, to find her own strength, and to build a life grounded in her own values. The book, titled Brave at Heart, A Journey of Resilience and Self-Discovery, was published in early summer. Charlotte's story was just one of many, each contribution a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The book quickly gained popularity, resonating with readers who found hope, encouragement, and validation in its pages. Charlotte was invited to several book signings and public readings, and she found herself in awe of the people who approached her with their own stories of triumph and healing. At one of these signings, a young woman named Leela stood in line, clutching the copy of the book to her chest. When she reached Charlotte, she introduced herself nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, her voice wavering. "Your story, it gave me the courage to leave a relationship that wasn't healthy. I thought I couldn't do it, that I'd never be strong enough. But reading about your journey, it helped me see that there's more to life than just surviving. We deserve to live fully." Charlotte felt a surge of emotion as she listened, her heart swelling with gratitude. Lila's words reminded her of her own journey, of the moments she had doubted her strength, and of the transformation that had led her to this place of peace and purpose. She hugged Leela, a quiet connection passing between them, a shared understanding of the power of resilience, of the beauty in starting over. Meanwhile, her relationship with Daniel continued to grow deeper and richer, an unfolding story that felt both comforting and exhilarating. They spent weekends exploring art galleries, hiking trails, and visiting small coastal towns where they'd indulge in local cuisine and stroll along quiet beaches. Their conversations were endless, a blend of laughter, dreams, and reflections. Daniel was her equal, her partner in curiosity and growth, and together they built a love that was steady, supportive, and fiercely genuine. One evening, Daniel surprised her with a painting he had commissioned from a local artist. It was a depiction of the lake where she had spent those early months of healing, the water still and reflective, the trees lush and green. The painting captured the serenity and strength that place held for her, and as she gazed at it, Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "I wanted you to have something that reminds you of where you came from," Daniel said softly, his hand warm on her shoulder. "The strength it took to rebuild your life, to become the incredible person you are today." Charlotte turned to him, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything. For letting me grow, for loving me for who I am." He wrapped his arms around her, their embrace a promise that transcended words. Charlotte knew, in that moment, that she had finally found a love rooted in respect, equality, and understanding, a love she had created through her own courage to heal. As autumn arrived, Charlotte was invited to be a guest on a popular podcast centered on resilience and personal growth. She was both nervous and excited, recognizing that this was another step toward fully owning her story. The host, a charismatic woman named Harper, welcomed Charlotte warmly and guided the conversation with a deep sense of empathy. "So, Charlotte," Harper began, her voice gentle yet curious, "if there's one lesson you'd want people to take away from your journey, what would it be?" Charlotte took a moment to gather her thoughts, reflecting on everything she had experienced, everything she had become. "I think the most important lesson I've learned is that healing isn't about erasing the past or forgetting what hurt us," she said. "It's about learning to carry those experiences with grace, about allowing them to shape us without letting them define us. We all have the strength within us to start over, to create a life that reflects our truest selves. It takes courage, but it's worth it." The response to the podcast episode was overwhelming. Messages poured in from listeners who resonated with her words, who felt seen and understood. Charlotte was struck by the impact her story had made, humbled by the realization that her journey had touched lives in ways she had never imagined. She felt a profound sense of purpose, a knowledge that her pain had not been in vain, but had instead become a beacon of hope for others. As the year drew to a close, Daniel suggested they spend the holidays at the lake house, a way to honor the place that had marked the beginning of her transformation. Together, they decorated the cozy cabin with strings of lights, filled the rooms with the scent of pine and cinnamon, and spent evenings curled up by the fire, their laughter mingling with the crackling of the logs. On Christmas morning, as soft snow blanketed the ground, Daniel led Charlotte to the edge of the lake. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the frozen water, and the world felt quiet, as if holding its breath. Daniel took her hands, his eyes filled with a warmth that melted the chill in the air. "Charlotte," he began, his voice steady but emotional, "I've watched you rebuild your life from the ground up. You've inspired me with your strength, your kindness, your courage. I love you, and I want to be with you on every step of your journey forward. Will you marry me?" Charlotte's heart swelled with joy, tears glistening in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart overflowing with love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she smiled. "Yes, Daniel. I want nothing more." They embraced, a quiet, profound happiness settling between them. For Charlotte, this moment was a testament to her journey, a reminder that she had found her way back to herself, and that in doing so, she had discovered a love that was deep, true, and resilient. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the snow, Charlotte knew that her story had come full circle. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her heartbreak into strength, and her loneliness into love. She was ready for the future, knowing that whatever it held, she would face it with an open heart, a courageous spirit, and a life reimagined.